Hello, Ranger Point Precision friends and family. Pat here with Adam Devine, CEO of Ranger Point Precision, and we have got a first look at the Rossi R95. This particular one is chambered in 3030, and it is going to be a new offering, and it's actually kind of exciting. There are some changes. This is modeled after your Marlins, but they have made some changes that we think are actually thoughtful.
So yes, Rossi has made some changes. Among those, you will notice that they've used what we call a sporter length magazine tube instead of the traditional full length magazine tube that you see on virtually all Marlin 336s. That will lose you just a little capacity, but I have to say I always have preferred that tenon and stud mounting system to the barrel bands just because it's a little more secure, a little more stable. It just tends to keep that mag tube from rolling around under the barrel, and as a result, you get kind of a more consistent shooting rifle in a lot of cases than you would with the barrel bands. All right, so folks, Pat's got the camera in his hands, and he's going to zoom in a little bit here. I mean, first of all, you can take a look at that satin finish on the receiver that I was talking about. To my eye, that's pretty nice. It doesn't perfectly match the barrel right now, but again, bear in mind that this is a pre-production rifle, so the finishes you see here won't necessarily be exactly the same on the production rifles. But they did a pretty nice job on this thing going in, especially for a gun they were just going to be test shooting at the factory. So from there, we'll take a look at this bolt. So here's a close-up of that extractor that I was talking about. You'll notice if you compare it to a Marlin that it does not have the spring steel extractor that has been common on those. Those spring steel extractors, and they are literally made out of one piece of spring steel and wrapped around a groove in the bolt that keeps them. And the simple job of that guy is to bend outward slightly as it goes over the case rim, and then grab it with a little claw and yank it out. The extractor has a simple job, but it's pretty critical. So these guys do need to be tuned just a little bit to make sure they're not overly tight or overly loose. If you look at the Rossi one now, it's got a little rocker pin, and behind that rocker pin it's going to have a coil spring, so that extractor claw is going to be able to move in and out quite easily and consistently on that coil spring. And because the coil spring exerts a very constant tension independent of the shape of this thing, these modern setups like this just tend to offer a very consistent action that doesn't require any serious tuning. And so that's a nice feature for all of us. It just means that chances are when that thing leaves the factory, no one's going to have to mess with that extractor to get it working right. So moving back to the rear of the bolt, there's a hole here with what looks like a little steel button in it, but if we turn this thing over, we realize what that actually is, and that is a firing pin safety block. If you guys at home are familiar with a lot of modern handguns, you will notice that they have exactly the same style of safety. Obviously this is a little different because it's a much larger firing pin, but essentially what that's doing is when that firing pin, that spring-loaded safety, is in the downward position, it prevents that firing pin from traveling forward and contacting the primer, thus preventing the gun from firing. Once the locking lug pushes up into that recess and lifts that safety out of the way, that firing pin can now travel smoothly and easily. This differs from the Marlin setup, which again has been employed for a century or more, and it works fine. My one complaint with the Marlin setup, and it's not a serious one, is that because of this split firing pin setup like this, you'll see this secondary firing pin in the back is at an angle to the bore of that bolt. That guy drops out of the way when the bolt is not in battery, and then the locking lug pushes that secondary firing pin up into alignment with the front firing pin, and the system works great. It means that if the lever's not fully shut and the locking lug not fully in place, the gun cannot ever fire because the firing pin can't be driven forward. It's a great system. My one complaint with it is that in order for that secondary pin to be pushed out of the way, there's a fairly stiff little flat spring in there that has to accomplish that. And because that flat spring has to push on it, it introduces a fair amount of friction into that firing pin system, which is just more for the hammer to overcome. The guns do it just fine by employing a fairly stiff hammer spring, but getting rid of that little friction in the system allows us basically less friction, easier firing pin movement, and I just like that. Again, nothing wrong with the old way, but I like the new way even better. So folks, what I've got in my hands now is a Marlin 1895 lever versus the new R95 lever. Bear in mind that just because this is the 4570 lever and this is the 3030 doesn't mean they aren't technically interchangeable in a Marlin. So these are just two versions of the same thing. So the main difference you're going to see here, first of all, you see a lot of similarities, but one of the main differences you're going to see here is that Rossi gave us quite a bit more room in that trigger guard, and I got to say I like that a lot. One of the things that we changed with our medium loop lever when we brought it out was to do similarly and give you more room in there, because the fact is for a lot of us hunting season comes in pretty cold weather and we want to wear gloves or need to wear gloves, and with that Marlin trigger guard, it can be kind of a tight squeeze, and that's a little nerve-wracking when you realize that an overly tight glove can potentially set that weapon off. So I like that Rossi gave us a bunch more room inside that trigger guard. Another minor difference, not an especially important one to function, is that if you can see that Rossi did change the plunger on their lever. Again, not really important to the user. It is neither a huge benefit or a huge detraction. It's just something they felt they should change. It could be noted that because they went to a smaller diameter plunger there's a lot more meat left in that paw area and trigger guard area. So if anything, it makes that lever just a little bit stronger. Not that that's much of a concern. These things don't typically break, but there you have it, another small change. And it also has a pretty nice cushy recoil pad on the back of that buttstock, which is a nice change of pace for a lot of guys who own 336s already that have pretty hard rubber or even plastic butt plates on them. I, for one, have kind of thin, meatless shoulders, and I like a little cushion. Mm-hmm. One thing that we noticed immediately is that Rossi is actually putting a little laser spot weld on the fore-end tenon. And that's just to keep that thing secure, keep it from sliding side to side. In the past, other manufacturers have used staking and or just tight fits. The laser weld thing came as a bit of a surprise to me, but as it turns out, it's easy enough to break that weld if you want to change out to accessories like the ones that we offer.
So upon release, Ranger Point Precision is actually going to have a full furniture set for this. They're going to have a pistol grip mod stock. We're going to have an end cap hand guard that's going to fit. All sorts of stuff to make this thing the space cowboy.
Yep, he ain't lying. We're already working on these. We were very privileged and honored that Rossi chose to share this rifle with us beforehand. This is a pre-production rifle, but we are going to get a chance to look at some production rifles as soon as they're available too. But so far, I'm very impressed with the quality of this rifle. The action cycle smooth. They have shot this thing and have been using it for testing, but there's no evidence that somebody got in there and hand polished it. It's running pretty nice right out of the gate.